Hello everyone, my name is Sindel. Today, I'm going to show you how to sew a buttonhole with the Singer Heavy Duty 4432. I used to be super intimidated to sew buttonholes by machine. I was always afraid I was going to mess it up and ruin the garment that I had just worked so hard on. Ahead of sewing the Pipit loungewear set this week, I wanted to show you how to sew a buttonhole because it's actually super easy. In order to sew a buttonhole, you're going to need a buttonhole presser foot, which looks something like this, thread and a wound bobbin, buttons, scissors, scrap fabric to test it out, and a handy pair of pliers to help you get buttons off of their little backers. Sometimes these wires can be a little bit tricky to get off with just your hands. Okay, before you can sew your buttonhole, you're going to need to set up your buttonhole presser foot. At the top of it, there's going to be this sliding thing, gauge, and that's going to tell your machine how wide of a buttonhole it needs to stitch. And you're going to tell it to do that by inserting the button. The easiest buttons to work with are plain, regular flat buttons. I, of course, am a huge fan of decorative buttons like this, but because they're really round and thick, they don't fit super well into this presser foot. So whenever I use buttons like this, I just make sure that I do a test buttonhole on a scrap piece of fabric to make sure that these are going to fit through. I set it to the best of my ability on the gauge here and just test it and make sure before I put it on my garment. But otherwise, what you do is just take the button and squeeze it right into the top there, and that's going to tell your machine how long of a buttonhole it needs to stitch. Now I'm going to set up my machine since I have my buttonhole foot ready. All I'm going to do first is just make sure that I have enough thread for the buttonhole. You want to make sure that you have enough bobbin thread, and you want to make sure you have enough thread on the top of the machine. The worst thing that can happen is running out of thread halfway through a buttonhole. The next thing I'm going to do is drop my presser foot. Oop, it was already dropped, haha. I'm going to drop my presser foot here, and I'm gonna attach the button foot. Now, a thing to know is you might have to finagle it a little bit. Here, let's see. Haha, I got it on first try. That's really cool. Don't worry about the tail ends of your thread. They're gonna get sewn into the buttonhole once the machine is going. So the next thing I'm going to do, you can see this little lever here. I'm gonna pull it down, and then this is kind of deceptive. The first time I sewed a buttonhole, I thought my buttonhole, I live next to a busy street, I thought my buttonhole function wasn't working, but I just hadn't pulled the lever all the way down. It seems to stop here, but you need to actually pull it until it clicks. And then you'll see that it'll be really low next to the plate on the sewing machine, and that this little tab back here, which is the adjusting slider on the button foot, is gonna collide with this little thing. Once you have this part to set up, we're going to go ahead and look at our knobs and dials. I'm going to adjust my stitch to the buttonhole function. And then here, which is the stitch length, I'm going to adjust the dial so it's also on a buttonhole. The closer it is to 1, the wider apart your stitches are going to be. The closer it is to 0, the closer together they're going to be. Then I'm going to take my stitch width all the way up to a 6, and sometimes you may need to adjust the tension down to like a 3, but yeah, I'm just gonna do that because I'm working with linen, so it's a pretty fine fabric. And then you'll have to just reference your machine's manual to figure out how to set up the exact settings for a buttonhole, but generally they're all similar. So typically on your garment with a heat erasable pen or a fabric soluble marker, you're going to make these capital I marks on the fabric where the buttonhole is going. The horizontal lines here indicate the top and the bottom of the buttonhole, and then the hole itself is the vertical line in the middle. This is important to draw these onto your garment just to make sure everything is spaced out and lined up correctly, but also so that you can line it up in the machine correctly. So you're going to want to see the bottom of the buttonhole inside the presser foot to know that it's going to stitch this correctly, because your foot is going to start here and move backwards, then to the top, and then it's going to switch around and go back down. That'll make more sense in just a second. Okay, my fabric is lined up here, and you can kind of see the bottom horizontal line of that I shape is lined up directly in that little keyhole on the button foot. I'm using black thread here, so it's really high contrast to the fabric, but of course you're going to choose something that's going to work well with your project. I'm just going to go ahead and engage this button here. You're just going to push it back, and then your sewing machine is going to do all the work. So with that lever pushed back, your button lined up with the bottom of that eye shape, you're just going to hit your presser foot and go. You do just need to watch for whenever it lines back up with where it started, because with a mechanical machine like the Heavy Duty 4432, it's not going to stop automatically. So when it comes back to the base, let it tack a few stitches so that's nice and secure, and then just lift your foot up and you're good to go. So now I'm just gonna take this out from under the machine. I've just taken this out from under the machine and trimmed off my tails, and I think it looks really good. I just guesstimated the length of this buttonhole before doing it. Normally I would measure it and it would be pretty exact, but that's what it looks like. And now I'll show you how you're going to cut down the center of it. Here is my best buttonhole tip for you, truly. When you finish your buttonhole, you're going to want to take 2 pins and you're going to want to take it across that horizontal top tack and bottom tack of the buttonhole, because what you're going to do next is take your stitch ripper and stitch the middle, or rip apart the middle of the buttonhole. Now, what can happen if you use too much force, of course, is your stitch ripper can slip and then it'll just rip through the entire buttonhole and your garment. But if you are using pins, it's not going to let it do that. You're not going to ruin your buttonhole and you're not going to ruin your garment. Okay, so here with the pins, that was a heat erasable marker, so I just took it to the iron, and now my blue marks are gone. I'm just going to rip open the center here, so I'm just going to insert my stitch ripper and give it a good tug all the way to the top and flip it and do the same for the other side. I usually start in the middle and then work down both ends, and there you go. So remove the pins, and this is your buttonhole. It looks kind of scrappy in the middle right now, but you know, as you use it, these middle pieces are going to fray away, and then you're going to be left with a really clean, nicely finished buttonhole. Any of the long pieces you can just trim away. And keep in mind too that if the first time you use your buttonhole it's a little bit stiff, that's going to be okay, because over time it's going to get more flexible. And of course we're just going to test that we can get our button, yep, right through. Perfect. That is wonderful. So that's the tutorial for today. This will be super handy to practice a few times before doing the Pipit loungewear set, where we have 5 to 6 buttons depending on your button size and button choice. And this is going to open up a whole range of things that you can sew, not only clothes, but things like curtains and shower curtains and decorations and all sorts of things. So you will see me in my next video. Bye.